Evelyn Hart stepped into the grand terminal of Denver International Airport on a bright, crisp morning with a calm determination that belied the storm brewing on the horizon. Clad in a dark gray sweatshirt and light gray sweatpants, she appeared as unassuming as any everyday traveler, a look that, in any other circumstance, would have been admired for its casual simplicity. Yet today, that very simplicity sparked a chain of events that would not only rock the confines of Summit Airlines, but also challenge the deeply rooted prejudices of those in power. Despite the whispers of disdain and the knowing glances from well-heeled travelers, Evelyn carried herself with the quiet confidence of a woman who had faced life's hardships and still emerged dignified. She had grown up in a humble rural town in Colorado, and every step she took was a tribute to the strength that comes from overcoming adversity. Although most would never suspect it, Evelyn was married to Alexander Bennett, a formidable billionaire tech innovator who had recently acquired Summit Airlines, a company renowned for its luxurious service and high-flying exclusivity. Yet, Evelyn had chosen to fly commercial, not to showcase her husband's influence, but to remain connected to the everyday struggles and joys of ordinary people. As the golden rays of the morning sun streamed through the expansive glass windows of the terminal, Evelyn ambled past bustling kiosks and clusters of chattering passengers. The soothing aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, and she made a beeline for the cafe counter, standing before the barista who greeted her with a courteous smile. Evelyn requested a simple black coffee, paying in cash from her worn leather wallet rather than using the exclusive platinum card stashed away in her designer phone case. The barista, a young man with a friendly yet curious smile, inquired about her destination. "Heading to Boston for a family celebration?" he asked. Evelyn, with a warm smile that concealed the deeper layers of her resolve, confirmed that she was en route to join her parents in celebrating their 40th wedding anniversary. Little did anyone suspect that this seemingly ordinary flight would soon transform into a stage for an extraordinary battle between discrimination and dignity. Making her way to gate A22 with her modest carry-on backpack slung over her shoulder, Evelyn's eyes roamed over the diverse tapestry of humanity gathered in the terminal. Families laughed together, elderly couples held hands tenderly, and sharp-suited business travelers tapped relentlessly on their laptops. Every face told a story, and each one resonated with the echoes of lives filled with both struggle and triumph. For Evelyn, whose own life had been a series of trials and quiet victories, these moments of shared humanity were both a comfort and a reminder of how far she had come. However, her plain attire and modest belongings soon drew the attention of those who believed that luxury demanded ostentation. A well-dressed businessman in an expensive suit cast a sidelong glance at her, his eyes narrowing in silent judgment. This was nothing new to Evelyn, whose life had long been punctuated by similar looks of disdain. Yet today, the undercurrent of prejudice in the air was more palpable than ever. When the gate agent called out for boarding pass verification, Evelyn stepped forward with the same calm assurance that had defined her entire life. She handed over her digital boarding pass from her phone, her expression serene, even as the agent's practiced smile faltered for just a fraction of a second when she noticed the contrast between Evelyn's casual attire and the first-class designation printed on her ticket. "Thank you, Ms. Hart. Enjoy your flight," the agent said, though her tone carried an unspoken skepticism that hinted at an unyielding bias. Evelyn's mind raced momentarily, but she maintained her composure and walked down the jet bridge into the luxurious first-class cabin. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was one of refined opulence, with wide leather seats upholstered in a deep navy blue, polished wood accents that gleamed under soft lighting, and flight attendants who moved with the efficiency of choreographed performers. However, as Evelyn stowed her well-worn backpack in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat, number 2A by the window, the attentive eyes of the crew were fixed on her, their expressions a mixture of disapproval and barely concealed condescension. Flight attendant Diane Phillips greeted her with a polite but noticeably stiff smile. "Good morning, Evelyn," Diane said. Her tone clipped as she registered the incongruity between Evelyn's attire and the expected first-class image. Evelyn's response was equally warm, her voice carrying a gentle firmness as she acknowledged the greeting and took her seat. Yet, even as she began to immerse herself in a dog-eared paperback, the tranquility of her journey was abruptly shattered by the appearance of Richard, a male flight attendant whose gaze was as skeptical as it was cold. "May I see your boarding pass?" he asked, in a low, measured tone that brooked no argument. Evelyn raised her eyes, her calm demeanor beginning to waver only slightly under the weight of his scrutiny. She displayed her digital boarding pass once again, the familiar numbers and names offering incontrovertible proof of her assignment to seat 2A in first class. Richard's eyes lingered on the screen, darting between the boarding pass and Evelyn's modest appearance, as if trying to reconcile the discrepancy between the two. A murmur of discontent rippled through the cabin as passengers exchanged glances, their curiosity barely masked by polite silence. The situation escalated when Diane, accompanied by the lead flight attendant Caroline, whose name badge signified her supervisory role, approached Evelyn with a clinical tone that left little room for empathy. "Ma'am, there seems to be some confusion with your boarding pass," Caroline stated, her words delivered with a measured coldness that sent a chill through Evelyn's heart. Evelyn placed her dog-eared paperback aside and met Caroline's gaze with quiet resolve. "There is no confusion. I am assigned to seat 2A and my boarding pass confirms it," she said firmly, her voice steady despite the rising tension. Caroline's smile tightened and the air grew heavy with an undercurrent of discrimination that went far beyond a simple error in the system. "Our system occasionally makes errors," Caroline replied, her tone dripping with condescension. "And it appears there may be a mistake. This is a first-class cabin and—" She trailed off, the implication hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Evelyn's eyes flashed with a quiet defiance as she interrupted. "And you think I do not belong here because of how I dress?" Her words were calm yet laced with an unmistakable accusation that cut through the pretense of professionalism. The tension in the cabin escalated rapidly. A distinguished older gentleman sitting across the aisle cleared his throat and interjected, "I have flown in sweatpants in first class many times," his voice both gentle and stern, yet even his interjection did little to ease the escalating conflict. Caroline's features contorted with barely hidden irritation as she addressed Evelyn once more. "Ma'am, if you cannot verify your identity, we will have to reassign you to an economy seat," she declared, her voice cold and unyielding, as if following an inflexible protocol designed to ostracize rather than to assist. Evelyn's heart pounded in her chest as she absorbed the full weight of the injustice unfolding around her. Here was a woman who had always prided herself on her integrity and self-respect, now being publicly humiliated by those entrusted with upholding the high standards of service on a flagship flight of Summit Airlines. Her mind flashed back to the years of hard work, the struggles of rising from humble beginnings, and the many times she had been told to conform to an image that was not her own. With a calm yet piercing voice, she replied, "I have already verified my identity, and my boarding pass has been checked twice. I did not purchase a ticket for special treatment based on appearance. I bought a ticket like everyone else." The room fell silent as her words echoed, drawing sympathetic looks from some passengers while others averted their eyes in discomfort. Richard, his arms folded in a gesture of disdain, stepped forward and said with a barely concealed sneer, "Ms. Hart, if that is indeed your name, we are merely following protocol." The words stung, each syllable a reminder of the implicit bias that seemed to govern the actions of the cabin crew. Evelyn's response was measured but imbued with a sorrow that resonated with every onlooker. "I am not asking for special treatment. I am simply asking for fairness," she said, her tone soft yet resolute, her eyes brimming with an inner pain that mirrored the long history of discrimination she had endured. In that moment, the disparity between the opulent surroundings of first class and the stark reality of prejudice was laid bare. The crew's insistence on reassigning her to economy was not a mere administrative error. It was a deliberate act of exclusion, a cruel reminder that some people, regardless of their accomplishments or inner worth, were deemed unworthy of the luxuries afforded to the elite. The older gentleman who had attempted to mediate shook his head in disapproval, but his protest was swallowed by the relentless tide of protocol and prejudice. "If you continue to question our procedures, ma'am, we have no choice but to enforce the rules," Caroline stated flatly. Evelyn, though deeply hurt by the injustice, maintained her composure and replied with quiet dignity, "I understand the need for protocol, but I refuse to be made a spectacle because of my appearance. I am being judged not for who I am or what I represent, but for the clothes I wear. And that, to me, is nothing short of discrimination." Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of every injustice she had ever faced, and it resonated deeply with the onlookers who recognized the truth in her words. As murmurs of agreement began to ripple through the cabin, the tension became almost tangible, the air heavy with the collective sorrow of witnessing a dignified soul being unfairly maligned. In a final attempt to salvage what remained of the dignity of the situation, Caroline offered a cold ultimatum: either verify your identity beyond doubt, or we will have to move you to an economy seat. Evelyn's heart ached at the implication that her very presence in first class was a mistake, a miscalculation that needed correcting. "I can verify my identity," she replied softly, "but I should not have to prove that I am worthy of a seat here." The quiet defiance in her tone belied the deep pain of a lifetime of discrimination, a pain that resonated with every person who had ever been made to feel less than they were, because they did not fit the mold. The other passengers watched in a mixture of sympathy and discomfort as Evelyn, with a measured grace, gathered her belongings. "I want accountability," she declared, her voice trembling ever so slightly with both sorrow and determination. "I do not want compensation for being humiliated. I want justice." In that moment, the gulf between the privileged few and the everyday traveler was laid bare for all to see. A painful reminder that the veneer of luxury was often marred by prejudice and cruelty. With a heavy heart and an unyielding resolve, Evelyn was escorted out of the first-class cabin by a flight attendant whose name was Diane, the very person who had first cast a doubtful glance in her direction. The walk from first class to economy felt like a descent from dignity, a public stripping away of the rights that should have been hers by virtue of simply being a paying passenger. As she passed rows of carefully arranged seats in business class, the whispers grew louder and the sympathetic looks from some passengers were quickly overshadowed by the cold stares of others who had been conditioned to accept such injustice as the norm. Once in the cramped confines of economy, Evelyn was directed to a middle seat with a perfunctory apology from the attendant. "We apologize for any inconvenience," the attendant said, her tone devoid of any genuine regret. Evelyn met her gaze steadily and replied, "No, you do not understand. This isn't an inconvenience. It's an affront to every person who has ever been made to feel inferior." The words, spoken with a quiet intensity, carried the weight of decades of accumulated pain and frustration. It was a declaration that she would not allow herself to be diminished by the narrow-mindedness of those who believed in strict social hierarchies. As the plane taxied down the runway, Evelyn's mind was already racing ahead to the next chapter of her life. The incident had been a stark reminder that even in the height of luxury and success, there existed a dark undercurrent of discrimination that could strike at any moment. The injustice of her treatment in first class was not just a personal slight, it was a symbol of a broader cultural malaise that had persisted for far too long. Deep within her, a spark of resolve was ignited, one that would soon kindle into a blazing call for change and retribution. Meanwhile, the corporate headquarters of Summit Airlines loomed large in downtown Denver the following morning, a sleek edifice of glass and steel that symbolized the company's lofty ambitions and premium brand. In one of the expansive executive suites, Chief Customer Officer Patricia Winters reviewed the day's agenda with a growing sense of dread. The quarterly customer experience review was scheduled for 10 a.m., and the numbers were far from promising. Passenger complaints had spiked by nearly 11% over the previous quarter, with the most common grievances centered around the attitude and behavior of the flight staff. It was a problem that had reached a boiling point, and Patricia knew that today's meeting would be a critical juncture for the future of the airline. Her assistant reminded her that the board members would be present and that Mr. Bennett, the formidable owner of Summit Airlines, had confirmed his attendance in person rather than via video call. The thought of facing her boss, a man known for his exacting standards and unforgiving approach to mistakes, made Patricia's stomach churn with anxiety. Alexander Bennett had acquired Summit Airlines only 9 months earlier, and today marked his first quarterly review appearance. His reputation for demanding nothing short of excellence was legendary, and his patience for incompetence or insensitivity was virtually non-existent. "Make sure Caroline Reynolds and her first-class cabin crew are present," Patricia instructed, her voice betraying the underlying tension of an impending storm. "Their performance is critical, and we need a positive example to counterbalance these mounting complaints." Across town, in the opulent confines of a spacious penthouse that overlooked the Denver skyline, Alexander Bennett adjusted his tie in a polished mirror. At 38 years old, he exuded an air of natural authority that came from years of success in the tech industry. His tailored navy suit and crisp white shirt were the epitome of understated power, a look that commanded respect without resorting to flamboyance. As he prepared for the day's proceedings, his thoughts drifted to the incident on the flight, a situation that had ignited a fire within him. "Are you sure you don't want me to address this matter directly with the flight attendants?" he asked, his voice low and controlled as he regarded Evelyn's reflection in the mirror. Evelyn, seated at the edge of their luxurious bed and still reeling from the humiliation of the previous day, shook her head gently. "This isn't about personal revenge, Alex," she replied, her tone soft yet resolute. "It's about changing a culture that has allowed such injustice to fester for far too long." Alexander's eyes hardened as he listened, his jaw clenching with restrained anger. "They humiliated my wife in front of everyone," he said, his voice tight with a blend of fury and sorrow. "This is not merely a lapse in service. It is a blatant display of discrimination and cruelty. We cannot allow such behavior to stand unchallenged." His words carried the promise of retribution, a vow to right the wrongs inflicted not only upon Evelyn but upon every individual who had ever been subjected to the sting of unfair prejudice. Even as he spoke, a plan began to take shape. A plan that would not only expose the rot within Summit Airlines, but also deliver a response so spectacular and decisive that it would leave everyone, from the most hardened executive to the everyday traveler, utterly speechless. As Evelyn sat in the cramped seat of the economy cabin, her eyes wandered to the faces of fellow passengers, some sympathetic, others indifferent, and still others openly hostile. Every glance and whispered remark stung like a physical blow, yet she refused to allow the humiliation to break her spirit. Instead, the injustice fanned the flames of a quiet rebellion inside her, a resolve to hold those responsible accountable. In her heart, she knew that this incident was not an isolated event, but part of a larger, insidious pattern of discrimination that permeated even the most prestigious institutions. And though she had endured her share of hardships over the years, today's events would mark a turning point, a moment when the scales of justice would finally begin to tip. In that charged atmosphere, as the plane ascended into a vast blue sky dotted with the promise of change, Evelyn Hart silently vowed that she would not be diminished by the cruelty of others. The memory of that day, etched in every sympathetic look and every whispered word of disapproval, would fuel her determination to fight back against a system that valued appearance over integrity and prejudice over fairness. In the days to come, as Alexander Bennett prepared to address the board and as Summit Airlines braced itself for the fallout, the seeds of retribution were being sown in quiet yet defiant gestures. A woman's refusal to be silenced, an executive's promise of accountability, and the collective power of ordinary people united in the pursuit of justice. The confrontation on the flight was only the beginning of a long and tumultuous journey. It was a journey that would see Evelyn Hart transform from a quietly dignified traveler into a symbol of resistance, a beacon of hope for all those who had been cast aside by a society obsessed with superficial markers of worth. With every step, every whispered word, and every act of quiet defiance, she would challenge the entrenched systems of discrimination and inequality that had long been the backbone of Summit Airlines and, by extension, much of American society. Her struggle, deeply personal yet universally resonant, would inspire others to stand up and demand change in a world where even the simplest act of flying could become a battleground for justice. In the coming days, as the story of Evelyn Hart's mistreatment spread like wildfire across news channels and social media, the faces behind the policies would be forced to confront the harsh realities of their own prejudices. The very foundation of Summit Airlines would be shaken by the revelations of systemic injustice, and the board members, once confident in their ability to placate public opinion with polished apologies and token gestures, would find themselves unprepared for the wave of outrage that was building. Alexander Bennett's arrival at the quarterly review would mark a pivotal moment in the company's history, a moment when every excuse would be stripped away and the full extent of the airline's failures would be laid bare before an unforgiving public. Even as Evelyn endured the indignity of being relegated to an economy seat, the memory of that morning's injustice burned brightly within her. It was a memory that would drive her forward, inspiring her to join forces with those who had long been silenced by fear and oppression. And though the road ahead promised to be fraught with challenges, she was determined to see it through to the end. The battle was not just for her own dignity, but for the rights of every individual who had ever been marginalized or cast aside because they did not conform to the narrow expectations of a prejudiced society. By the time Summit Airlines board meeting convened, the atmosphere in the executive suite was electric with anticipation. Patricia Winters, still reeling from the barrage of customer complaints, braced herself for Alexander's verdict, knowing that his reaction to the incident would set the tone for the airline's future. And as Alexander took his seat at the head of the long, polished conference table, his eyes blazing with an intensity that promised retribution, everyone in that room knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The scales of power were about to be tipped, and the seeds of a radical, transformative change had been sown. Evelyn Hart's journey that day had been one of quiet dignity in the face of overwhelming adversity, but it was also the spark that ignited a movement that would not rest until every act of discrimination was met with a response that was both fierce and unequivocally just. In the corridors of Summit Airlines and beyond, the message was clear. Injustice, no matter how subtle or insidious, would no longer be tolerated. And as the plane soared through a sky that seemed to stretch endlessly toward a brighter, more equitable future, Evelyn's quiet vow echoed in the hearts of those who yearned for change. This was not just a story of humiliation and heartache. It was a story of resilience, of a woman who refused to be defined by the cruelty of others. It was a story that would, in time, galvanize a movement and force a reckoning among those who had long hidden behind the veneer of luxury and superiority. In every whispered conversation, in every sympathetic glance, and in every determined stride taken by ordinary people, the spirit of Evelyn Hart lived on. A spirit that was as unyielding as it was inspiring, and a spirit that would one day bring about a revolution in the way justice was served. And so, as the sun set over Denver on that fateful day, casting long shadows over the city's skyline, Evelyn Hart prepared herself for the battle ahead. She knew that the road to true justice was paved with challenges, and that the forces of discrimination would fight tooth and nail to maintain their grip on power. Yet with every ounce of strength drawn from her past, and every hopeful beat of her compassionate heart, she resolved to face those challenges head-on. The journey would be long, the struggle bitter, and the sacrifices many, but the promise of a future where every person was valued for who they were, beyond appearances or superficial judgments, was a prize worth every battle fought. This, dear listener, is not just a tale of one woman's journey through adversity. It is a clarion call to all who have ever felt marginalized, to those who have endured the sting of unjust treatment, and to every soul that yearns for a world where fairness triumphs over prejudice. The story of Evelyn Hart is a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming cruelty, hope can be kindled, and from the ashes of humiliation can rise a force strong enough to transform an entire culture. And while the journey ahead promises both heartache and hard-won victories, the legacy of this day will forever shine as a beacon of resistance, inspiring us all to stand up, speak out, and demand the respect and dignity that is our birthright. In the end, as the wheels of change began to turn at Summit Airlines and beyond, the voice of one ordinary yet extraordinary woman reverberated through the corridors of power. Evelyn Hart's quiet defiance, born of years of hardship and tempered by an unshakable sense of self-worth, would soon become a rallying cry for justice, echoing far beyond the confines of a single economy seat. And as the nation watched with bated breath, one could not help but feel a stirring of hope. A hope that the days of discrimination were numbered, and that a new era of accountability and compassion was on the horizon. This is the story of how one simple act of defiance in a crowded airport transformed into a movement that would challenge the very foundations of elitism and prejudice. It is a story that reminds us that no matter how daunting the forces arrayed against us may seem, the courage to stand up for what is right can change the world. And though the path ahead is fraught with obstacles, the promise of a future built on fairness and equality is a light that will never be extinguished. As you reflect on this tale, remember that every injustice, no matter how small, is an opportunity for change. And as Evelyn Hart's journey shows us, when we rise above the petty judgments of society and dare to demand our rightful place, the impact of our actions can reverberate far beyond our own lives. In a world that often seems divided by superficial standards, her story is a testament to the enduring power of compassion, resilience, and the unbreakable human spirit. May this account serve as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring call to action for all who believe in the promise of justice and the possibility of redemption. The fight for equality is never easy, but with every step taken by those brave enough to challenge the status quo, we move ever closer to a world where every person is judged not by their appearance or circumstance, but by the content of their character and the strength of their heart. And so, as the story of Evelyn Hart unfolds, let it be known that the battle against discrimination and cruelty is a battle for all of us, a battle in which even the smallest voice can ignite a revolution, and in which every act of defiance is a step toward a brighter, more inclusive future. Evelyn Hart rose gracefully from her seat, smoothing the fabric of her dark gray sweatshirt and light gray sweatpants as she stepped into the spotlight of a high-stakes corporate confrontation. Standing beside her formidable husband, Alexander Bennett, she could feel the weight of every insult and every biased glance that had been hurled her way the day before. Today, however, was not about meek resignation or quiet suffering. It was about setting the scales of justice right in a world that judged a person by appearances rather than by the content of their character. As Alexander adjusted his tie with deliberate precision, Evelyn's eyes met his with a steady calm that belied the fire burning quietly inside her. "This is bigger than me or those 3 crew members," she declared softly, her tone measured yet resolute, as if she were speaking directly to every soul who had ever been made to feel less than they deserved. They had agreed on a plan that morning, a plan to expose a deeply flawed system within Summit Airlines, a system that had, just yesterday, forced Evelyn, a paying passenger who had flown in first class on her own merit, into a humiliating demotion solely because she chose comfort over convention. Alexander's face softened as he recalled the countless reasons he had fallen in love with his wife. Evelyn had always possessed an unfiltered view of the world, a perspective untainted by the golden haze of privilege, even though wealth now surrounded her. "All right," Alexander had agreed earlier that day, "we will do it your way." He had checked his watch, noting that the meeting at Summit Airlines Headquarters would begin in exactly 1 hour. "The meeting starts in an hour," he had said, and Evelyn had nodded firmly. "Absolutely sure," she replied, with the kind of conviction that left no room for doubt. "And I will be wearing exactly what I wore yesterday," she added, a quiet promise that the same unadorned attire that had drawn sneers and discriminatory stares would now serve as a banner of defiance. At Summit Airlines Headquarters, a sleek modern building of glass and steel nestled in downtown Denver, the executive conference room was already filling with board members, department heads, and key staff. The room buzzed with an undercurrent of curiosity as whispers passed from one polished face to another. Caroline Reynolds, the senior first-class cabin manager, sat with Richard and Diane, two flight attendants who had been part of the scandal of the previous day. They had been surprised by the invitation to attend such a high-level meeting, naturally assuming it would be an opportunity to tout their consistently high performance metrics. "Maybe they are finally creating that elite service team we have been discussing," Richard had murmured to Diane in a low, excited tone, his eyes alight with the possibility of advancement. Diane had smoothed her perfectly pressed uniform as she nodded in agreement. "I heard the new owner is actually attending," she had added quietly, hinting that this could indeed be a turning point for all of them. Before long, Patricia Winters, the chief customer officer, called the meeting to order with a calm yet authoritative tone. "Thank you all for being here today," she began, her voice reverberating in the polished conference room. "As you know, customer experience is the cornerstone of our brand promise at Summit Airlines. Today, we will review our quarterly performance metrics and discuss strategies for improvement." At that precise moment, the heavy door opened and Alexander Bennett entered the room. Tall and commanding, he carried himself with the quiet assurance that came from building a tech empire from scratch. "Mr. Bennett, we are honored to have you join us today," Patricia said with a respectful nod as Alexander took his seat at the head of the table. His gaze was steely yet inscrutable as he listened to the presentation, occasionally scribbling notes in a small leather-bound notebook. Patricia's presentation proceeded with slides displaying various metrics and charts, each one a testament to both the high standards and the glaring deficiencies within the airline service. "Now, I would like to call attention to our bright spots," she said, her tone warming as she highlighted that the first-class service on transcontinental routes had maintained an impressive 92% satisfaction rating, well above the industry average. She gestured subtly toward Caroline Reynolds, Richard, and Diane. It was the first time Alexander had really looked at them, his gaze sharp and penetrating, yet he offered no outward reaction. At that moment, Caroline Reynolds was invited to share insights about the first-class service experience. Stepping to the front of the room with the practiced confidence of someone accustomed to being in charge, she began, "At Summit Airlines, we believe the first-class experience begins the moment our passengers step on board. We are trained to recognize and accommodate the needs of our premium travelers, who expect and deserve a certain level of service." Her words flowed smoothly until an unexpected interruption shattered the carefully rehearsed narrative. The door to the conference room opened quietly, and there, standing just inside the threshold, was the unmistakable figure of the woman from yesterday's flight. The same woman who had been deemed unworthy of first class merely because of her casual attire. Evelyn Hart, as she was now known in these transformed accounts, stood with a quiet dignity that made it impossible for anyone in the room to ignore her presence. For a moment, Caroline's words faltered as she stared in disbelief. Her eyes widened, and confusion etched itself onto her face. Richard and Diane exchanged alarmed glances, their expressions morphing from smug assurance to pure dread, as they too recognized the defiant passenger from the previous day. Alexander Bennett rose from his seat, his voice calm but laced with an undercurrent of controlled fury. "I apologize for the interruption," he said, though the tone in his voice made it clear that there was nothing at all apologetic about this disturbance. "I believe some of you have already met my wife, Evelyn Hart," he announced, and the room fell into a stunned silence as his words reverberated like a clarion call for justice. A tableau of shock and dawning horror took over the room. Board members, executives, and department heads looked from Alexander to Evelyn to the flight attendants with expressions that mixed disbelief and growing anger. "Your wife," whispered Patricia Winters, her voice barely audible above the collective murmur. Alexander's tone remained deceptively casual as he confirmed, "Yes." Each syllable landed like a hammer blow against the carefully constructed image of superior service that Summit Airlines had long prided itself on. Evelyn stepped forward, standing beside her husband in the exact outfit that had, until now, been used as a weapon against her. The faint glimmer of her silver bracelet caught the light, a simple yet potent symbol of her understated elegance and resilience. Alexander continued, his words deliberate and measured. "Perhaps Caroline was about to explain our approach to recognizing premium travelers." His statement, meant to deflect the obvious, only served to heighten the tension. Caroline's mouth opened and closed in a vain attempt to salvage her presentation, but no coherent explanation emerged. Her carefully constructed narrative of first-class service excellence lay in ruins, crumpled by the undeniable reality of bias. Richard's earlier smirk had evaporated, replaced by an expression of raw dread, and Diane's eyes shone with remorse as she sat silently. "There must have been a misunderstanding," Caroline finally stammered, her voice trembling under the weight of the unfolding scandal. "A misunderstanding," Alexander repeated thoughtfully, his tone now edged with bitter irony. He turned to Evelyn, who, with a calm purpose that radiated authority, addressed the entire room. "Would you characterize yesterday's incident as a misunderstanding?" she asked, her voice clear and resonant. "What happened yesterday was not a misunderstanding. It was bias in action." Her words, delivered in a tone that was both gentle and unyielding, reached every corner of the silent room. "I was not judged by my boarding pass, which was checked multiple times. I was judged by my appearance. You decided I did not belong in first class simply because I did not match your preconceived image of who deserves to be there. You questioned my identity, something you have never done for any other passenger. And ultimately, you humiliated me by forcing me back into economy class, in front of a full plane of onlookers." A heavy silence fell over the room as her words sank in. A board member cleared his throat uncomfortably and suggested, "Mr. Bennett, perhaps we should discuss this privately." But Alexander cut him off firmly. "No," he declared, his voice resonating with authority. "This is precisely what this customer experience meeting should address." He turned his steely gaze to the assembled staff and continued, "I am not here solely as an angry husband, although I certainly feel anger. I am here as the owner of this airline, deeply concerned about a culture that judges people based solely on appearances, rather than treating all customers with the respect they deserve." Patricia Winters looked stricken, and a few seconds later Evelyn interjected softly yet firmly, "Mr. Bennett, I must add that after the incident, I spoke with several flight attendants and airport staff who recounted similar experiences. A teenager in a hoodie with a business class ticket was repeatedly questioned about his identity. A disabled passenger was assumed to be in the wrong line for priority boarding. An elderly woman dressed in casual clothes was redirected from the first-class lounge despite having a valid access pass. With a measured steadiness, she placed a folder on the conference table. This folder contains 27 documented incidents in the past 3 months alone, all following the same discriminatory pattern. This is not about the actions of 3 flight attendants. It is about a culture that has allowed these prejudice practices to fester. The revelation struck the room like a physical force. Patricia Winters reached for the folder with trembling hands, whispering, "I had no idea." Alexander's voice was firm as he responded, "That is precisely the problem. You should have known." The incidents had been reported but were dismissed as mere customer misunderstandings and buried within the labyrinth of the feedback system. Caroline, attempting once more to salvage the situation, spoke up in a tone of professional contrition. "Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, on behalf of our team, I offer my deepest apologies for yesterday's incident. There are protocols we are expected to follow regarding verification." Evelyn's voice rang out clearly, cutting through the murmurs. "Stop! You still do not understand. This is not about protocols. When the businessman in seat 2C wore sweatpants in first class last month, did you ask for his identification? When the famous actress in seat 2A boarded wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, did you ever question her right to be there? The protocols themselves are not the issue. It is the selective application of those protocols that is the problem." Sensing that his career might be hanging by a thread, Richard attempted to interject. "Mrs. Bennett, there was no way for us to know who you were." Evelyn's eyes blazed as she replied, "That is exactly the point. You should not need to know who I am to treat me with basic dignity. My worth as a passenger is not determined by my marriage, my bank account, or the clothes I wear. I purchased a ticket just like everyone else." A heavy, oppressive silence settled over the room as the truth of her words sank in. Alexander fixed his gaze on Caroline, Richard, and Diane, stating coldly, "Your actions yesterday reflect poor judgment and explicit bias. In many companies, such actions would be cause for immediate termination. However, firing you would only serve as a temporary salve while the underlying systemic issues remain unaddressed." He turned to address the entire room. "Starting next week, Summit Airlines will implement a comprehensive anti-bias training program for all customer-facing staff. We will also revise our customer feedback system to specifically track and address incidents involving discrimination or prejudice." Evelyn stepped forward once more, her presence both gentle and unyielding as she addressed the flight attendants directly. "And you three," she said, "will be temporarily reassigned. You will spend 1 month working alongside our customer advocacy team, directly handling passenger complaints, followed by another month serving in economy class. After that, if your performance reviews demonstrate a genuine understanding of these issues, you may reapply for your positions in first class." At that moment, Patricia Winters found her voice and added, "I will personally oversee these changes, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett, and I believe we should also compensate the other passengers whose complaints you have disregarded." Alexander nodded in agreement before addressing the flight attendants one final time. "This is not about punishment," he said solemnly. "It is about understanding. The true measure of premium service is not how well you treat those who appear important. It is how you treat every person, regardless of appearance." As the gravity of his words sank in, Board Chair Eleanor Simmons spoke for the first time. "I believe we owe Mrs. Bennett our gratitude," she said firmly. "She has identified a significant blind spot in our operation that, if left unchecked, would continue to damage our reputation and alienate our customers. This is an opportunity for meaningful change." Caroline, Richard, and Diane sat in stunned silence, their earlier confidence shattered by the realization of their actions and the consequences that now lay before them. It was not a matter of immediate termination, but rather the daunting opportunity to learn and change. 3 months later, the transformation began to bear fruit. Evelyn Hart settled into seat 2A on Summit Airlines, flight 923 from Denver to San Francisco, dressed in the same dark gray sweatshirt, light gray sweatpants, and black cap that had once marked her for Humiliation. As she opened her dog-eared book to prepare for the 5-hour journey to a climate research conference, a familiar voice called out gently, "Good morning, Mrs. Hart. Can I offer you a beverage before takeoff?" Evelyn looked up to see Richard standing beside her seat. His demeanor was entirely different now, professional, attentive, and lacking the condescension of their previous encounter. "Just water for now, thank you," she replied with a soft smile. As Richard placed the water on her armrest, he hesitated for a moment before speaking quietly. "Mrs. Hart, I am not sure if you remember me." Evelyn's eyes held a knowing kindness as she replied, "I remember you very well, Richard." He nodded, acknowledging the memory of their shared experience. "I wanted to thank you," he said in a hushed tone. "These past 3 months have been incredibly educational for me." Evelyn regarded him thoughtfully, sensing the sincerity in his voice. "Tell me, Richard," she asked gently, "how have you come to understand what went wrong?" His eyes, now softened with regret and a desire to improve, met hers as he began to explain how his perspective had shifted. He recalled the moment when he had first witnessed Evelyn being forcibly removed from first class, and how that incident had haunted him ever since. "I have spent many nights reflecting on our actions," he admitted, "and I have realized that it is not enough to simply follow protocols without considering the humanity behind every customer. I now understand that our duty is to treat every passenger with the respect they deserve, regardless of how they look or what they wear." His words, simple yet powerful, resonated deeply with Evelyn, who had endured so much humiliation, yet now felt the faintest glimmer of hope. Over the coming months, Summit Airlines underwent a transformation that promised to reshape the entire culture of the company. Evelyn's courageous stand had sparked not just a temporary reassignment for a few flight attendants, but had triggered a sweeping internal investigation. In the boardroom, Alexander Bennett led the charge with an unwavering determination to ensure that no customer would ever again be made to feel inferior simply because they did not fit a narrow, superficial mold. The anti-bias training programs, which were soon rolled out to every customer-facing employee, became a topic of intense discussion and debate among the staff, many of whom were forced to confront long-held prejudices. As part of this initiative, employees were encouraged to share personal stories of discrimination and to examine how their actions, however well-intentioned, might perpetuate harmful stereotypes. Evelyn's story, which had once been a personal tragedy, now served as a rallying cry for change within the company and beyond. News of the incident and the subsequent reforms spread quickly through social media and mainstream news outlets. People from all walks of life praised Evelyn's strength and resilience, and her experience became a powerful symbol of the need for accountability in a world too often dominated by appearances. For many older women, in particular, her story resonated deeply. It was a reminder that dignity and respect were rights that should never be compromised, no matter one's station in life. At a celebratory press conference held several months later, Alexander Bennett addressed reporters with a measured tone, expressing both regret for the incident and pride in the strides the company had made toward a more equitable culture. "We have learned a great deal from this experience," he said, "and we are committed to ensuring that every passenger who steps onto one of our flights is treated with the utmost respect and care. This is not just about policy changes, it is about changing hearts and minds." The press conference, broadcast live across multiple platforms, was met with both applause and cautious optimism from viewers who had long demanded accountability from major corporations. Back on board Flight 923, as Evelyn gazed out the window at the sprawling landscape below, a patchwork of green fields, winding highways and small towns that reminded her of her humble beginnings, she allowed herself a moment of reflection. The journey from humiliation to empowerment had been long and painful, yet it had also been a catalyst for lasting change. Every time she closed her eyes, she could recall the piercing looks of disdain from that fateful flight, the whispered accusations, and the cold, methodical application of protocols that had once reduced her to a symbol of discrimination. But she also remembered the strength that had carried her through the ordeal and the solidarity of those who had stood by her side, both in the boardroom and among the passengers who had witnessed her transformation. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet over the vast expanse of the American West, Evelyn thought of the many battles that still lay ahead in the fight for equality. Yet she felt a profound sense of hope, knowing that her voice, once silenced by the cruelty of biased systems, had grown into a thunderous roar demanding change. She recalled Richard's words from that quiet conversation by the window and the genuine remorse he had expressed for his past actions. In his eyes, she saw the promise of redemption, not just for him but for every employee at Summit Airlines who had been complicit in a culture of discrimination. That promise of change, she believed, was the first step toward a future where every person was valued for who they were, not for how they looked or what labels society had imposed on them. The story of Evelyn Hart, once a tale of quiet dignity amidst harsh prejudice, had evolved into a saga of resistance and reform, a saga that would continue to inspire countless others. Her steadfast refusal to be defined by superficial judgments had forced an entire corporate giant to confront its own shortcomings and to commit, publicly and unequivocally, to the principles of fairness and respect. And though the road ahead was still fraught with challenges, every act of defiance, every measured word in that boardroom, and every genuine apology from a remorseful employee helped pave the way for a new era, one in which every individual, regardless of appearance or circumstance, would be granted the dignity they deserved. As Evelyn's flight began its descent toward San Francisco, she felt a renewed sense of purpose. The world outside the window was bathed in the soft glow of the early morning sun, and she wondered how many lives might be changed by the ripple effect of her courageous stand. She knew that the battle for justice was far from over, but the victory of that day, a victory measured not in monetary compensation or punitive measures, but in the genuine transformation of hearts, was a reminder that change, however slow, was always possible. In the days that followed, Summit Airlines witnessed a remarkable transformation. Employees who had once been the architects of exclusion were now undergoing rigorous training and engaging in heartfelt dialogues about the true meaning of customer service. The anti-bias initiatives were not merely a checkbox on a corporate agenda. They became the cornerstone of a cultural renaissance that redefined what it meant to be a premium service provider. Evelyn's story was broadcast in news segments and read in editorials, her face a symbol of resilience and the power of standing up for one's rights. And while some detractors still clung to outdated notions of decorum and hierarchy, a growing chorus of voices demanded a future where every traveler, no matter how casually dressed, would be treated with fairness and respect. Even the board members, initially taken aback by the events of that fateful day, began to acknowledge the profound lessons that had emerged from the scandal. In private meetings, executives discussed the need for radical changes in the way customer feedback was processed. They resolved that incidents of discrimination would be tracked meticulously, and that those responsible for such acts would be held accountable in ways that transcended mere punitive actions. Instead, the focus would be on rehabilitation and education, a long-term solution that promised to foster a genuine understanding of the human element behind every service interaction. Evelyn Hart, now revered not only as the wife of a billionaire but as a champion of social justice, continued to live her life with the same understated grace that had defined her from the very beginning. She knew that her journey had only just begun. Every flight she took, every conference she attended, and every quiet conversation she shared with fellow passengers and staff became a testament to her unwavering belief in the possibility of change. And though the scars of past injustices still whispered in her heart, they also served as reminders that even the most painful experiences could give birth to profound transformation. As Summit Airlines moved forward into a new chapter, the legacy of that turbulent day was honored not by erasure but by remembrance, a reminder that the battle against prejudice is an ongoing struggle. Evelyn's quiet defiance had sparked a movement, one that reached far beyond the polished halls of corporate boardrooms and the exclusive cabins of luxury airplanes. It was a movement that resonated with anyone who had ever been marginalized or dismissed, and it inspired a generation to believe that dignity and respect were not privileges reserved for the few, but rights inherent to every human being. In that spirit, Evelyn Hart continued her journey, both literally and metaphorically. With each flight, she carried not only her belongings in a modest backpack, but also the hope of a future where justice and compassion reigned supreme. Her story, told in hushed tones by grateful employees and proudly recounted by those who had witnessed the dramatic shift at Summit Airlines, became a beacon for change. A change that promised to make the skies a little friendlier, the service a little warmer, and the world a little more just. And so, as the wheels of the airplane touched down on the tarmac and Evelyn prepared to step off the flight that had, in its own quiet way, become a symbol of transformation, she smiled softly. The memory of yesterday's pain had been transmuted into a force that would continue to shape not only her own destiny, but the destinies of countless others. In that moment, as the gentle hum of conversation filled the cabin and the promise of a new day beckoned, she knew that her journey was far from over. It was only the beginning of a revolution that would one day leave the world saying, with a sense of awe and relief, "Ha-he." This, dear listener, is not merely a tale of corporate missteps and personal humiliation. It is a story of how one courageous soul, by daring to stand up against prejudice, can ignite a fire that transforms an entire industry. It is a story that reminds us all that every act of bias, no matter how small, can have far-reaching consequences, and that every act of defiance in the name of justice can pave the way for a better tomorrow. Evelyn Hart's journey from the depths of discrimination to the heights of corporate accountability serves as a powerful testament to the strength of the human spirit. Her experience, once used as a tool to shame her, became the catalyst for sweeping reforms that redefined what it meant to provide service with heart. And while the road ahead remains challenging, her legacy stands as an enduring reminder that the fight for equality is one that we must all undertake together. As I share this tale with you today, I invite you to reflect on the importance of treating every individual with the dignity they deserve. In a world where appearances too often dictate worth, let us remember that true excellence lies not in outward symbols of status, but in the compassion and respect we show to one another. Evelyn Hart's story is one of pain, yes, but it is also one of hope. A hope that, through courage and perseverance, even the most entrenched systems of bias can be dismantled and rebuilt on the solid foundation of fairness and humanity. In the end, as the sun set on that eventful day at Summit Airlines Headquarters and the echoes of a hard-won battle for justice still reverberated through its halls, Evelyn Hart stepped forward with quiet determination. Her story, though marked by trials and heartache, had become a clarion call for change, a call that would resonate far beyond the confines of a single airline or a single boardroom. And as we listen to her words, let us all be reminded that no matter how steep the odds, the power to reshape our world lies within each of us. May this account serve as both a cautionary tale and an inspiring call to action for every soul who has ever felt marginalized or dismissed. For in the strength of one determined voice, we find the courage to challenge injustice, to demand accountability, and ultimately, to build a future where respect and equality are not merely aspirations, but the very fabric of our shared humanity. Life is a journey full of valuable lessons that teach us about resilience, compassion, and the true meaning of strength. Over the years, I have learned that every challenge we face is an opportunity to grow and transform ourselves into better, wiser individuals. Reflecting on my own experiences, I have come to understand that the obstacles we encounter are not meant to break us, but rather to build us up, pushing us to tap into our inner reserves of courage and determination. I want to share with you some of these lessons, inspire you with examples from my own life, and express my deepest gratitude to every single person who has followed my journey. Your unwavering support has been a tremendous source of motivation for me, and I hope that by sharing my story, I can spark a similar flame of determination and hope within you. Throughout my life, I have experienced moments of doubt, judgment, and even harsh criticism simply because I chose a path that was true to who I am. There were times when society's expectations and superficial standards made me feel small and insignificant. However, I have learned that our worth is not measured by the opinions of others, nor is it defined by the way we look or the material possessions we hold. Instead, true value lies in our character, our kindness, and the way we treat those around us. I once faced a situation where I was judged solely on my appearance, and instead of letting that injustice defeat me, I chose to stand tall and let my inner light shine. I realized that every negative comment or dismissive gesture was not a reflection of my true worth, but rather an expression of the other person's limitations. This epiphany was a turning point in my life, a reminder that the only approval we truly need is our own. I have also witnessed the transformative power of gratitude and empathy. In every hardship, there is a lesson waiting to be learned, a moment that can open our eyes to the beauty of life. For instance, during a particularly challenging phase, I took the time to listen to the stories of others who had also faced discrimination and adversity. Hearing their voices and understanding their struggles made me realize that we are all connected by our shared human experiences. It taught me that by lifting each other up, we can create a ripple effect of positive change that touches every corner of our community. Whether it was a kind word from a stranger or the support of a dear friend, every gesture of compassion reminded me that I was never alone, and that together we can overcome any obstacle. I want to take this moment to thank each and every one of you who has walked this path with me. Your encouragement, your comments, your likes, and your heartfelt messages have given me strength during my darkest hours and have celebrated my victories as if they were your own. To those who have shared your stories, offered advice, or simply stopped by to say hello, please know that your support means the world to me. You have been the wind beneath my wings, lifting me up when I needed it most, and reminding me that no matter how difficult life may seem, there is always hope and there is always a way forward. Your kindness has been a beacon of light, and it has motivated me to keep sharing my journey, knowing that together we can make a difference. One of the most important lessons I have learned is that change begins from within. It starts by accepting who we are, acknowledging our imperfections, and celebrating our unique qualities. I have learned to embrace every aspect of myself, the strengths that have propelled me forward and the weaknesses that have taught me humility and compassion. This process of self-acceptance has been a cornerstone of my personal growth. It has allowed me to set healthy boundaries, pursue my passions fearlessly, and stand up for what I believe in, even when it means facing criticism or misunderstanding. I encourage you all to take a moment each day to reflect on your own journey. Consider the challenges you have overcome, the lessons you have learned, and the love you have given and received. Recognize that every experience, whether good or bad, has contributed to the person you are today, and that each day is an opportunity to write a new chapter in your story. I also want to share some examples that have inspired me along the way. I have met women who, despite facing tremendous obstacles, continue to pursue their dreams with relentless passion. I have seen mothers who balance work, family, and personal growth with grace and strength, proving that age is just a number and that our potential is limitless. These women remind me that our journeys are not defined by our setbacks, but by our ability to rise above them. Their stories are a testament to the power of perseverance, the beauty of resilience, and the magic that happens when we choose to believe in ourselves. They have shown me that success is not about achieving perfection, but about continuously striving to be the best version of ourselves, even in the face of adversity. In this ever-changing world, it is essential to nurture our dreams and never lose sight of our goals. The path may be filled with unexpected twists and turns, but each detour offers a chance to learn and grow. I firmly believe that the hardships we face today are shaping us into the individuals we will become tomorrow. Every moment of pain, every setback, is a stepping stone on the journey to a brighter future. And as we continue to learn from our experiences, we not only grow stronger, but also become a source of inspiration for others. Let us remember that our struggles are not in vain. They are the building blocks of our legacy, the foundation upon which we construct our dreams. As I conclude this message, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to all of you who have been with me on this incredible journey. Your support has been a powerful reminder that even in a world that sometimes feels cold and indifferent, there is warmth, love, and genuine care to be found. If you have any questions, thoughts, or if you simply want to share your own story, please leave a comment below. Your words will serve as a tremendous source of motivation and inspiration not only for me but for everyone in our community. Let us continue to support one another, to uplift each other, and to celebrate the beautiful tapestry of our shared experiences. Thank you so much for being here, for listening, and for believing in the power of change. Together, we can create a world where every person is valued for who they truly are, where kindness reigns supreme, and where our collective strength lights the way to a future filled with hope and endless possibilities. Your continued encouragement and interaction mean more to me than words can express, and I look forward to reading your comments and learning from your experiences. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for your unwavering support and for being an essential part of this journey toward a more compassionate and just world.